I'm Alex Butterfield, and I'm 91 years of age. I'll be 92 in April of 18. And I live here in La Jolla, California. And I'm essentially retired, have been for some time, although I am involved with some boards and some activities here in the San Diego area. When I was young, I aspired to be a military officer, I think primarily because my father was one. My dad was a graduate of the Naval Academy. 1922 was his class, and he went into aviation. In those days, you had to serve with the fleet for 2 years, though, before you could go into aviation. So 2 years out of the Naval Academy, 2 or 3 out of the Naval Academy, he went to Pensacola and became a naval aviator trainee, and that's where I was born. I was born in Pensacola. It was kind of the home of naval aviation. So I was imbued with all that military aviation right from the start. We lived on naval air stations. We used to play in the, they had on every naval air station, they have sort of an airplane junkyard where crashed airplanes are put aside. We'd go over there and play in the cockpits of all kinds of fighters. And then the war came along, and the war changed things for everybody, because suddenly everybody wanted very much to get into the military. So I wanted to go to the Naval Academy, tried, flunked the physical. It was very disappointing. I had gone to a Naval Academy prep school right here in San Diego, so I decided to join the Merchant Marine just to get in the war. And it's so different then. Everybody wanted to get in so badly. And sometimes you didn't have your choice of service, you just wanted to get there. So I thought I'd love to be a deckhand on a merchant ship. And the headquarters for signing up for that on the West Coast was right here in San Pedro, right up the coast. But going through San Clemente, which is not quite halfway to San Pedro, the bus stopped there to let passengers off and get people on. There was this revelry going on in the streets. I didn't know what. And lo and behold, we learned while the bus was there that Japan had capitulated. We'd already dropped the bombs on Nagasaki and Hiroshima, and nobody knew what Japan was going to do. There was that interim period of several weeks, and they had finally capitulated. So now, yeah, the war is over, so I'm thinking, I can't go to the Naval Academy. Did I really want to try for West Point? Gave up that opportunity. I would have been in the West Point class of 50 had I gone. And had I gone to the Naval Academy past, I would have been in the class of 49 at the Naval Academy. So now I've squandered a second opportunity. Well, the first wasn't my fault, it was physical. So I decided to go to UCLA, and I became a math major. I was fairly good in mathematics because math is one of the primary subjects you learn when you're trying to get into one of these military academies. So I went down and signed up to be an aviation cadet. It was a one-year course if you had 2 years of college, and I had 2 years of college just barely. Now if I passed that physical, which I did, amazingly, I don't know, maybe my nearsightedness had diminished to some degree, but I passed the mental. And got orders to go to flying training in Texas at Goodfellow Air Force Base in San Angelo, Texas. And the day I reported in, which was October 4th of 1946, I would automatically leave being a seaman recruit in the Naval Air Reserve and become an aviation cadet in active duty Air Force. When I graduated, I stayed on and instructed there. I was instructing in P-51s. That was the best fighter we had in World War II. And in June of 1950, when the Korean War started, they converted that base to a fighter gunnery base and got rid of the cadets. I was teaching cadets. I went straight from being a cadet to teaching cadets. So 2 years later now, I'm perfect to go to Korea. I wanted to go to Korea in the worst way. When I graduated from flying school, I became an officer, a second lieutenant, and I married Charlotte, the same girl, Charlotte McGuire, but we had lost a child. And the military does not do that. If you've just lost a child, they will not send you into combat. So we have 3 children. They're 66, 64, and 61 right now. 1 boy, the oldest, and 2 girls, Susan and Lisa. And we have, so those 3, we have 8 grandchildren, and we have 6 or 7 great-grandchildren. I think it may just be 7 as of this month. So I've lived in 7 countries now, and went on to just get more flying time. I became a squadron commander when I was a major. I was simply lucky to do that. You're normally a lieutenant colonel. If you're a squadron commander in the Navy, you're a commander, which is the same as a lieutenant colonel in the Marine Corps and the Air Force. The Vietnam War had started. It was in its infancy, I'll say that, but we kept 6 airplanes down there in Saigon all the time. And I actually commanded, when I was there, all of the low and medium level tactical reconnaissance activities in Southeast Asia. Then I went from there to Washington. I was promoted to lieutenant colonel. I went to Washington, was in plans, and just for a little while, and then I was transferred to the immediate office of the Secretary of Defense as the military assistant for White House matters. And Lyndon Johnson was president then. Lyndon Johnson had a lot of briefings in his bedroom, and many of them just happened to be at night. And so I'd been up in Lyndon Johnson's room. The only other people in the room were the Secretary of State, the National Security Advisor. Secretary of State was, the name slips, Dean Rusk, and the Secretary of Defense was McNamara, and me. I'm over there with the charts, but I'm in the background, and some really interesting briefings. I drive home sometimes at 2 in the morning thinking, God, I've just spent an hour and a half in the President's bedroom with the Secretary of State and the Secretary. I like to think I wasn't impressionable, but I think anybody would, I'm just driving home, because as many people do, I've worked late, but it's now almost 3 a.m., and that's where I've been. I didn't become anything in the military, but I did become administrator of the Federal Aviation Administration, which is a level 2 job in federal government. I was the Commander-in-Chief Pacific's representative to the government of Australia. And at that time, the Commander-in-Chief of the Pacific Theater, my boss, was Admiral Sharp, a Navy 4-star guy. And after I'd been there a year, it became Admiral McCain, the father of Senator McCain. So I was pretty close to Admiral McCain when his son, the now senator, was shot down and imprisoned in the Hanoi Hilton. So, but I read in this article on the front page, I can see it's all about Nixon's election. It was just the week before. We left right after the election. We voted there in Canberra, the capital of Australia. And now we're up in New Guinea. And here's this thing recounting the election, and Nixon won by a big margin. So I see in reading about Nixon that this guy named Haldeman is going to be his top aide. He was my wife's best friend's boyfriend. So a light went on, and I thought, maybe, just maybe, I can somehow, through Bob, either get an exception made so I don't have to stay here another 2 years, because I wanted to go back to Vietnam in the worst way. That's where I had to be. Or I could even work in the Nixon White House through Bob for maybe a year. You couldn't really join it and then leave 6 months later, but a year would be, and who knew how long the war in Vietnam would last? I had no idea it was going to close down when it did. It had been going on already for a long time. It was a shot, so I sat down in the rain coming down, and I drafted a letter to Bob, Dear Bob. And then I had some things that if I was smart, I could attach. I had some letters of commendation from the Secretary of Defense, from the Deputy Secretary of Defense, Cyrus Vance. I had an efficiency report from Joe Califano, which made me look like I walked on water. I mean, you know, I did not deserve these things, I'm admitting that, but I had been very lucky in the bosses I had and some of the jobs I had. I mean, it's just unheard of to tell a lie. And I really do not believe that I told a lie as an adult. In affairs of the heart, I will admit that I've told white lies. And reasonableness is a word I always liked. When I had a couple of companies later in the civilian world, we had a company where the byword was reasonableness. We will always try to be reasonable in our decision making and dealing with other people and all, and showing respect. I think courtesy and thoughtfulness, I know I'm sounding like some kind of a guy in church now or something, but and again, this reasonableness. I like all of those things. I like to be reasonable. And I like people easily. I liked everybody on the Nixon White House staff, except maybe Rosemary Woods, Nixon's secretary, and the press secretary, Ron Ziegler. I wasn't crazy about those two people, but I really liked everybody there, and I like people easily. And I am generally liked. I don't think, now I have a lot of detractors, of course, because I ended up with this controversial thing with the tapes. I think most of America, I would be the last to know probably, I think most of America understood that I had done the right thing. I didn't want to testify against the president. That's the last thing I wanted to do. And yet here I am the guy who ended up going before the Watergate committee, having to say, yes, there were tapes. And that was a secret that I was going to keep, well, unless something like this came up. I was not going to lie if a direct question were posed to me. And the question was, were there ever listening devices in the Oval Office? Then it went on from there, and I think that what really hurt me was my military pals, the guys in the Air Force that I knew so well for all those 20-some years. They were the least understanding, because military guys are brought up that the president is our commander-in-chief. And they couldn't possibly know what I knew about Nixon. I got to like him in a lot of ways. Partly because he liked me, that's human nature. But I got to like him after a while when he liked me, and I felt sorry for him a lot of the time. In a tiny way, we bonded because I had a daughter who was later in a terrible automobile accident with my wife and was in the hospital at Bethesda for a couple of months, for a couple of weeks, about a month. And when she got out, he said, bring her by the office. And she came in the back. It wasn't put on the schedule. He wasn't trying to get credit for seeing this girl. And she was a beautiful girl. She broke her mandibular. She lost a lot of teeth. She had a scar here that cut into her lip, so it foreshortened her smile. And one of the first things he said to her, he said, you see these teeth? Not mine. He said, I didn't know that. Nobody. Well, no one was witness to that. It was just the president and no photographer and Susan. So Nixon, I liked him for that he did for my daughter. I'm going to choke up just by thinking about that. And when Tricia was missing that time, just he and I knew. Secret Service guys were very embarrassed. We were both fathers of daughters, and I did a lot of personal things for him. I did his voting for him and for Mrs. Nixon. I signed his estate plan as a witness to his estate plan. So I became very close to him, and yet I wanted to leave the White House. I didn't want to stay there. But not many people had the opportunities I had to be a squadron commander and to work in war plans, and then to work in the Secretary of Defense's office, and then to be the guy in the Secretary of Defense's office who dealt with the White House.